And I don't think there's a unified view on many of these subjects. You know, there's a general view on a lot of them, but not maybe a unified view on them. And they're ones that really, they're important for us to consider. So we're going to look into a can of worms. And a can of worms has got a different variety of worms. And hopefully we'll get down to the one that will do it. But there's going to involve some interaction on your part, okay? So we're still in 1 Timothy. And here we go. This is a start in our passage. This is 2 Timothy. I'm sorry. This is 1 Timothy, not 2 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 2. I urge you, first of all, to pray for all people. Ask God to help them, intercede on their behalf. Now remember, he's saying, this is Paul talking to Timothy, and he's asking him to pray for everybody, and that's including the rulers. You'll see it here in a second. And give thanks for them. Pray this way for kings and all who are in authority so that we can live peacefully and peaceful and quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity. So he's praying for these guys, even though they're pagans, that basically they'll take their hands off us and we'll be able to live quietly and in dignity and not be hassled by them. And by this time, rulers are already beginning, sub-rulers, not so much the Caesars, are already beginning to handle them. He says, this is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants everyone to be saved and to understand the truth. And then he gives a little, this is like a poem that the early church had already been circulating, okay? And it's our first can of worms. There is one God and one mediator who can reconcile God and humanity. The man, Jesus Christ, gave his life to purchase freedom for everyone. All right, now why is that a can of worms? Well, if the sacrifice of Christ, as it says there, is the only way to be saved, what about those who never heard of him or lived before he came? Are they lost or perhaps saved by some other method or criteria? Take a second, turn around to people around you, tell me what you think. If there's only one mediator between God and man by which you can be saved, what about those people that came before? And what about those people that are never going to hear from him, never did hear from him for thousands of years? I'll go back to the verse in case you need to see it. One God, one mediator, who can reconcile God and humanity. How about the Jews? How were the Jews saved? If there's one mediator.
Are we talking about other people as well? Like people who have no idea?
Past and people who have no idea, both of them.
Like before God revealed himself to Abraham?
Yeah, before that.
Everyone there?
Anybody who never knew about Christ, either before him or after him.
I don't know.
Okay, 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds to solve this riddle. Okay, all right. Give me some answers, whether you just heard them in your group or just, and you don't have to claim them as right, just things that you floated by, okay? By the way, this is a really important question because if Jesus is the only way to be saved, right? If there's one mediator between God and man, and it's the only way, what happens to everybody? What happens to people that don't hear him? Never hear about him.
God will make himself known to you, whether through his creation or through the Bible and other people nowadays. And for Christ, they get.
You get a pass?
I remember when Charles Price was here, I was kind of talking to him a little bit about it, and one of the ways he described it was like the people in the Old Testament, they, like based off of the scriptures that they had, they believed there was a Messiah that was going to come, right? So they believed that he was going to come and that he was going to save them, and I mean, many people in the Old Testament repented just like we would repent now, but Jesus obviously hadn't died on the cross yet.
Right.
So he described it as like writing a check, like predating a check. Or
Okay, predating. Okay, now that takes care of the Old Testament people. If that's, how about everybody else?
in the New Testament.
Well, right now, there are guys in Lower Bongo, Congo, someplace that never heard of Jesus. Okay, they die. There's one mediator. Are they lost? How many think they're lost? It's okay if you think they're lost. Okay. How many think they're not lost? How many of you know who think they're not lost know why they're not lost? Okay. That's what I want to help you with. Okay. Okay. Because if it's true that Christ is the only mediator, okay, then how does that work? All right, I'm going to give you the solution to this. And again, you don't have to agree with this. A lot of people would argue with me about this, but I think it's pretty sensible, okay? The sacrifice on the cross works forwards and backwards in time. It works forwards and backwards in time. That the sacrifice on the cross, whether they know about it or not, whether they respond in the most elementary faith, like in Romans 2, when it talks about those that God writes on the heart of a man, that, you know, his all about him and how they respond to that. How they respond to that is maybe just partial knowledge, like the knowledge of a child has about Jesus. A knowledge of a child doesn't understand all the fancy words, propitiation for sin and all that kind of stuff. They just reach their arms out to God in their most primitive understanding. And none of us would ever go, well, you didn't really understand this very well, so you're not in. Because the blood of Christ is strong enough and big enough to cover anybody who reaches out to God. That's why Jesus goes, look, if you seek, you will find. If you knock, you'll be open. Anybody who really seeks after God, whoever did seek after God, currently does seek after God, even if they've never heard about Christ, the blood of Christ is big enough to cover them, unbeknownst to them. Does that make sense? So everybody's in the Old Testament, all of their sins were being covered in advance, were covered by the blood of Christ because it was working backwards in time as well as forwards in time. Okay. That's how to solve that. Now, you don't have to believe that. There are people who don't. There are people who go, we have to go reach the lost because they're all going to hell because they don't know about Christ. Okay. And it's certainly true that their lives would be definitely enriched, and their understanding and their ability to commune with God are definitely enriched if they know about him. But not all of us buy that idea that just because you don't hear, you're doomed, right? We think God's maybe bigger than that, and that people who seek him and don't understand him completely still have a shot at it. But they're all saved. Anybody who's ever going to be saved is saved by the blood of Christ, whether it's before, after, whether they hear about it or haven't heard about it. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I raised my hand for that they're lost, but the question said if they've never heard. But God can reveal himself in ways that aren't for people.
Right,
Whether
exactly
it's
right.
dreams and visions or
Right.
miracles or
Right.
whatever. Like, he can do so much more than just hearing or seeing. So
And like I said, Romans 2 gives us that hint that it can happen. That does happen. So I'm throwing this at you because you're going to get this kind of thing. What are you saying? What about the people that, you know? And if you remember this, that the sacrifice and the cross works forwards and backwards in time. It's not captive to time. And even though Jesus died 2,000 years ago, his death was just as sufficient for people that lived 4,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, okay? Because nobody's ever got to heaven on the basis of works. Nobody in the Old Testament was ever good enough. They were never able to achieve that. Jesus points that out really well, because in the end, it was always going to be the cross that did that, all right? Yeah.
So people who didn't know Jesus and died and went to hell, are they given a second chance?
Well, why would they go to hell if they put their trust in responding to God and His Spirit as He unveils Himself to them? So what I'm saying is it'll be counted to them as righteousness. Yeah.
So with the whole idea of like God's creation reveals Himself to His people, and like God can use dreams and visions, and just those different aspects. Does that mean that no one has ever not experienced God throughout their entire life?
Well, that depends on whether you're a Calvinist or not. You know, the Calvinist would say, well, they were created and destined from the very beginning of their lives to never know God, okay, or to reject God, and they don't really have a choice in it. That's how they do it. If you're not a Calvinist, you would probably answer it in a different way, in the affirmative, that somehow or another God reveals Himself to every person, whether they want to move towards Him or move away from Him is really their choice. And how He does that can be really different. And He might use the book of nature. He might use some story that suddenly resonates. Has the same, if you know what a pitchfork is? Pitch. What do they call it? For a pitch. What's that called, Jenna? Not Jenna. Emma, what is that called? The thing that you hit for tuning fork. Yeah, thank you. Tuning fork. You know what a tuning fork is? Okay. When you hit it, it makes that right sound. Maybe there's like spiritual tuning forks in fables that they hear or stories that they hear that all of a sudden God uses to illuminate Himself. We don't know. I know my friends working in missionary situations, they are looking for those tuning forks in culture that they go, see, that's what God is like. And again, you are in company of Christians who go, if you've never heard, you're doomed. But you also are in company of Christians who go, no, it doesn't mean because you've never heard, you're doomed. Because if you respond like Romans 2 talks about, then you got a shot at it. But you're never going to be saved because of your works, because of your brilliance or that kind of stuff. It's always going to be through the blood on the cross, whether you know about it or not. Yeah.
So it goes for those who have never heard about Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean it goes for people in like Islam who haven't heard about Christ but believe in one God?
Well, it depends on how deep in Islam are you to where you understand Jesus. I'm going to give you my opinion on some of this stuff. There are a lot of people sitting in American churches who are dumb as a box of hair when it comes to really understanding anything about Jesus. They have like this little kindergarten idea about God and Jesus and stuff like that. And Muslims and people like that who have heard virtually nothing about Jesus, it's not going to be how good a Muslim they were. It's going to be based on when God presses something on their heart and they move towards that. Right? They might have all kinds of bad ideas about God, which, by the way, when we stand before God, we're all going to go, boy, I had a bunch of bad ideas about you, we put God in all kinds of weird little contortions and boxes and stuff like that. When we see when we stand in His glory, we're going to go, whew, I had this little kindergarten idea about who you were. So I would say that they have a shot, but it has nothing to do with Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or anything like that. It has to do with God working. If they're seeking Him, He's going to unveil Himself in some way. Yeah.
Wouldn't some people not be able to make a decision? Like, if we believe that everyone who's ever been pregnant was carrying a person, and all those ladies who aborted, right? So all those children, like, there's no way God revealed Himself to them in the womb.
Well, that's another good can of worms for you, okay? I mean, if you want to, let's go down that bunny trail for a second. If we're all born with original sin, does an unborn person, because they're not born, have original sin? when does original sin kick in? Like through the birth canal? Is that where original sin is? I mean, what, you know,
The age of accountability.
their age of accountability? Okay.
But I mean, doesn't Scripture say that we're born of incorruptible seed? It's like just the fact that we have human DNA makes us sinners.
Yeah, so if sin, the sin nature comes with us, it's prepackaged like our vision and our, you know, if it's prepackaged, does that mean that a baby in the womb has sin?
Has sin, but I don't think it would bear the consequences of sin.
So if that baby is killed or dies in the womb, one way or the other, what happens to them? Are they, you know, do they just not exist? Are they immediately hurled into the fullness of who they would have been, like all of us? I don't know if you ever thought about that, but when you die, what are you going to look like? Are you going to be your age? You going to have different color hair? You know? Are we all going to look the same, like we're clones? I mean, you know, you die when you're 90, you're going to go, you know, you stand before God, you're all wrinkled and old and can barely get around, or, you know, you're going to be all 14-year-olds? Is that what it's going to be like? I mean, it's hard for us even to conceive that. Do we all get hurled to the fullest of our capacity of what God's designed us for? Lewis put it this way. He said, our regular physical self, the stuff we're pinch and run around and abuse and stuff, it is not even as equal to the new body that we're going to have and the new person we're going to be as our shadow is to us. You look at somebody's shadow, you can see who they are, right? By their shadow. But it has nothing, there's nothing about that shadow that is anything except for an outline of who we really are. So our bodies are like shadows compared to the new body that we're going to get. I don't know if that helps or not, but so my opinion would be babies are immediately hurled into the fullness of what God's designed for them, as will you and I. All right. Well, that's one can of worms, but there's more in this passage. Okay. Now Paul gets into some instructions for life in community. Remember, he's talking to a guy. He says, I was here, I'm leaving, I'm putting you in charge, and here's what I want you to do. And he begins to give him a list of instructions. And he says this, in every place of worship, I want men to pray with holy hands lifted up to God, free from anger and controversy. When he says men, he's talking specifically about men. So, is this an instruction for men to lift their hands when they pray? If so, why don't we require that action? Guys, you're going to pray, everybody put your hands up. You know? If that's an instruction, why don't we require it? Why are women not asked to do this? Okay. Would it be inappropriate if women did lift their hands when they prayed? Okay. If it's not an instruction, what's his point?
It's not instruction for who? Could be just to this church and this time.
Okay, well then, there's one view. That's an instruction just for those guys.
What was the verse again?
This is,
That word?
yeah, 8. I didn't put it on there.
Verse 8.
Yeah.
What version are you reading?
That's a New Living. So what was this point? So when you read that, do you read it? Well, that's for those guys. By the way, that's a real possibility, because remember what he's talking about is these guys were fighting with each other and stuff like that. They were having, there was a lot of conflict, and so he's basically saying rather than do things that's going to make you put your fists up, if you're going to do something, drop the controversy, and if you're going to use your hands, throw them up into prayer, right? And he only addresses the men, because probably it was the men who were driving a lot of this controversy. That's one guess. So like Lexi, sort of hit that one on the head. That's one guess. But what's interesting is it is an instruction, but when we look at it, people go, well, we don't think that that's like a universal instruction of how one ought to do in worship service. Is it wrong to lift your hands in prayer and worship? No. But is it instruction? And his point was probably something different. But it gets more worms are coming out of the can. And I want women to be modest in their appearance. They should wear decent and appropriate clothing. Should not draw attention to themselves by the way they fix their hair, by the wearing of gold or pearls or expensive clothes. For women who claim to be devoted to God should make themselves attractive by the good things that they do. In the original, of course, it says by the braiding of hair, okay, and the weaving of hair. And the reason that, which is pretty hilarious in our culture, because most of the time when you think of a woman who has hair, right, that's a very, very modest, that's Heidi or something, You got your little braided hair things. That's seen as very, very modest in our culture. But in the Roman culture, that was, at this time, that's what the prostitutes did. They would braid their hair. They put all kinds of gold stuff in it. And there was all these temples in Ephesus that had temple prostitutes. It's kind of hard, like if you worship Aphrodite or one of those kind of gods, they had temple prostitutes, and you would pay money, have a relationship with temple prostitutes, and when they punched the clock and the temple shut, dozens of these prostitutes would hit the street, and they'd be decked out like you would think a prostitute would look, trying to attract customers, because they would get a portion of the money and a portion of it would go into the coffers for this god, right? So Paul was actually picking on a style of clothing and dress that was equivalent with what hookers wore, right? When we look at it now, we kind of go, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And what's interesting is he picked on guys, now he's picking on women, talking to them about it. So, why does he pick on women only when it comes to attire?
We didn't read the next verse yet.
But why does he pick on women only? He goes on to, we're not even going to get that far today. Why does he pick on women only when it comes to, he's not going to pick on guys, and guys, make sure you wear a belt.
Was there guy prostitutes back then?
No.
I think it points to just the differences of men and women that we struggle with.
Okay. So when he picked on men, it was hey man, don't get in the middle of it. Now he's picking on women and saying, hey, you need to dress yourself modestly. So who decides what's decent and appropriate when it comes to clothing? And how much is expensive? Okay, who should? Let's go the other way. Take a second, talk to each other, and come up with an idea of who should decide what is decent and appropriate when it comes to clothing, and who should decide, and how do you know how much is expensive? Start on the first one, and then if you get that figured out, go to the second one. I'm only going to give you just like a short time on this, so decide who should be. Okay, another 30 seconds. Just give me an answer on this. Okay, all right. Come back with me for a second here. First of all, Paul, he doesn't. I really think Timothy probably didn't appreciate what Paul did. Paul tosses this grenade into his lap, okay? All right? He says, tell the women to do this. But he doesn't give him any other tools he doesn't give him the tools I'm just asking you to do. So what's Timothy got to do? He's got to figure this out. Is he going to be the one who judges that? Who's going to be the one that judges that? They're going to pick some little 80-year-old lady? Are they going to pick a Jewish lady to tell the Gentile ladies how to dress? Or are they pick a Gentile lady to tell the Jewish people how to dress?
Are we going back in time with this, or are we?
No, we're right there in AD 70 something, you know. And so who in that church community? And I'm trying to get you to think in the terms of church community because you guys are going to be the leaders of a church community. We got the marching orders. We have the standard, you know, more or less. But the standard is fuzzy. So who decides on what that standard ought to be? What'd you guys say?
I suggested that it would be that since men are the ones who would stumble by inappropriate or indecent clothing, that it would be the father of the family or the husband of the family or whoever is the man of the family would know what is or what isn't.
And if there's no man in the family? Okay. We'll come back to that. What'd you guys say?
We kind of talked, so like we really misunderstood.
Okay.
I have a question, because like, I feel like to a certain extent, culture determines that, but at the same time, culture can go way wrong, and you've seen that here. But culture in like Africa, they're, you know, tribes and stuff, women just don't wear tops. It's just part of it. It's not like a weird sexual thing.
Right.
It's just
Right.
part of it. So I don't really know what defines decent.
So let's just take the Western culture just to make it simple. In a Western culture, who ought to determine what's appropriate and inappropriate? Social media, that's a good one. Okay, yeah.
Well, I think Faith actually brought up a really good point when we were talking is that most of our culture knows what modesty looks like, or like what is decent and appropriate, and it's more of our like rebellious nature that makes us dress, or like has women dressing like skimpy or.
Okay, I'll buy that. So whose job is it to enforce this teaching? A parental figure?
I think ultimately with the boundaries of like understanding culture and the norms, and then also understanding scripture, what it says, how we're supposed to keep ourselves pure and make sure we're not being a stumbling block. I think ultimately the person who should be holding this accountable is each one of us.
Okay.
Each person should have a standard of what that looks like and should be holding themselves accountable to that.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. So let's just say it this way. In a group like this, if somebody came to you and said, dude, I think your shorts are too short,
That's not my standard.
you know, and you go, well, I don't think they are. I go, yeah, well, you know, by my standards where I come from, you're wearing, you know, when a guy wears his shorts up like that, it's a signal that he's gay or he's whatever, you know, and so then what do you do when you're going, well, I don't think so. Look at all these other guys. Yeah, but your legs are longer, so therefore.
I think that's what you bring to people.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
where you understand it, and then if there's a conflict.
Okay, so what I'm hearing the ultimate determiner would actually be a collective as opposed to individual. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because in every church, you're going to have an auntie who's going to look at you and go, why are you wearing that? You know, right?
So, I think actually it's good, I can see a good example of this is, so I like walking around barefoot like all the time. I'm constantly barefoot, right? But I didn't realize this, but apparently I was offending some of the aunties at church because I show up barefoot at church all the time. And like I'm constantly walking around barefoot. And I didn't know that, but the cultural normal is to be wearing shoes when you're outside, barefoot when you're inside. And you don't want to have it. So what is decent or appropriate was decided by like the elders of the culture, not by a single individual.
Yeah, and you've come into a new culture, and so that's where it gets really interesting. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of time and mess with this, and one of these actually touches on what you're doing, or what you're saying. So I'm just going to pass these out at random, okay? All right. And I have enough. There's one for you guys, and then one for you guys over here. All right, this is more or less this same answer. Take a look at those in your group and see what you come up with. Did I misspell something there?
It's just, what do you tell them? How do you explain why you came to that decision?
So continue on this, and this is more or less this question, but
Just dress for gals in the church.
such a loaded question. It is a loaded question.
Okay. You were asked to settle an argument among the young adults of your church. It was together to decide whether to dress for gals in the church. How do you explain why you think that very religious?
I know, you can just slip it in there. Be like,
Why do you like dress? Why do you dress?
A what?
Is there a difference between custom and culture?
Yeah, I mean, they're really interwoven because usually customs and culture are sort of together, you know. So, and customs and cultures can be regional. So, like it might be a custom in one part of the country to do certain things. I'll give you an example. You're the barefoot one. Do you have that one? Okay. There. When I went to South Dakota as a ninth grader, I took off my shoes and ran around barefooted. That was not the custom or the culture in South Dakota. So that was, and everyone was looking at me like I was weird, and I was looking at them like, "What's your problem?" You know. But in our, for example, in KCF, we sort of have a culture that's not as, it's more dressed down. But how do you know when you've dressed down too much? You know, how do you know when you've moved past the custom and the culture, and you've moved into some other territory? You know, what do you do about that? You know. Couple more minutes on this. Couple more minutes. You guys solve it? It's all solved? You figured it out? Huh? You do, but do you agree with him? I don't even know which one you have, so I passed them out randomly. What? Oh, okay. Figure out how to do that? How to explain that? Like that. Put your hand there.
Basically, if you go into this meeting, he mentions Matthew 5, where you don't want to make another believer stumble, and this isn't hurting your relationship with God. So you can either submit to them and what they're doing and stand against the Bible, or you can decide to leave that Bible study and find a different one. Or if you stay and you submit, then maybe later on down the road, talk to the leaders who are putting on this Bible study and talk about like how this doesn't really apply anymore. But you don't have to make.
Why doesn't it apply anymore? Why doesn't it apply? I mean, couldn't you be accused then of picking and choosing out of Scripture? I pick what I want for myself, but I don't pick things that are. What's your hint? What would be your hint that this is cultural?
Back to the meat and how
and probably the very fact that Paul brought it up. If it was just a standard, like it was everybody ought to wear deodorant, then yeah. Well, he was talking about guys with long hair and all kinds of stuff like that in that passage, but he was in the middle of a situation where you had Jews who always covered their heads and pagans who didn't cover their heads, and along with the meat eating, the guys who ate and so he's got these clashes of cultures, and so he's trying to lay down a law that is what a practice that'll work for that particular church, you know. Which, by the way, was carried on. I mean, if you see the Catholics, they still wear doilies. You know where that comes from?
People miss the whole point because they're focusing on things that don't matter.
Well, maybe they didn't miss the point at all. Maybe that was. We don't know their culture well enough to know whether that was really a.
I think some of them, which I'd be willing to say if he's bringing it up, it probably was, like you said. But that's why, like, translating that today to how we apply that today.
Right.
I think it's just an example of how we need to not be distracted by things like that and not miss the whole purpose behind why we're here.
Yeah.
Because meeting to have a Bible study is good, and sometimes humbling ourselves to be able to be part of it and to submit to something like this. This always reminds me of the story of Matthew. Matthew talks about when they sit down to eat and food is placed in front of you, and saying, "I can't eat this because blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
You eat it because it'd be disrespectful not to. Just because they're a little bit less mature believer, you don't want to offend them by doing something that you already know.
Right.
You know what I mean? Better. So it's one of those things that you submit to.
But it's sticky. You can see where it's sticky.
It is. Yeah. It's hard.
Okay. All right. So here's what I'd like you to do. You may not have this totally resolved, but why don't we start back here? Why don't you guys read us what your situation is and tell us in a nutshell what your conclusions were, if you have any.
Basically, the whole thing?
Well, just explain it or read it. Yeah.
Azul is new to this country. He's a devout Christian, very happy. He has some young people in his age to worship with. The issue is he needs deodorant and he just smells really bad. But in his culture, using deodorant is unnatural and considered something only females would do. As you are in leadership, the situation is being reported to you so that you can give advice and teach.
And what was your decision for Azul, who stinks?
I just said, yeah, sure, I'll talk to him. If he doesn't want to, it's not a big deal. Like, in my opinion, I just tell that person that came up to me and reported it, hey, you can talk to him if you want to, but I'm not gonna, if we go back to yesterday's class, I'm not gonna kick him out of church because he smells bad.
Okay.
Get over it. So, yeah.
But that's the normal in his, so you're asking him to do something and he's going, that's...
And if he says no, I'm like, okay. But I'll ask him, sure.
Okay.
I'll be like, yeah,
It's
kind of
something,
smell bad. Would you mind?
we address every time we have a Japanese student that comes and was like, hey, we're in America, we wear deodorant.
So what do you say? What do you say to all the people that don't want to sit near Azul or have him, they don't want him in their car? Because
You might figure out that wearing deodorant is
Or
a
ask him
benefit.
to put on deodorant.
you what now?
Don't sit next to him or ask him to put on deodorant. Like my best friend Ben at home, right? He doesn't smell. Ben was here, you met him.
Oh no.
Ben always smells horrible. But we can tell him, we'll be like, dude, you need to take a shower. And then he just won't. He just smells that. Like I just gotta get over it, I can choose not to hang out with Ben, but it's just up to me.
That's a hygienic thing rather than a cultural thing, probably.
I know. But yeah, that's just my point.
Yeah.
It's just is that big a deal?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. All right. Shoeless guys here. Let's.
Oh yeah, this is a very practical question. You move to a culture where people are very sensitive about taking their shoes off the door. They consider it inappropriate.
He got it!
Wow, that's so random. You got that one. I know, right? They actually consider it inappropriate and rude if you bring dirty shoes or dirty bare feet into the house. This seems very odd, even dumb to you. Do you consider So, I feel like we came to a bypass, kind of a consensus in the same sense as, that doesn't make any sense, but depending on how you were coming to the culture, like if I came to the culture and I was trying to like minister there, or I was trying to like involve myself in it, and I wanted the culture to respect me, then I would fully embrace their, customs or their culture or whatever, and like wear shoes. But if I was like living there just to live there, then I would respect their customs at their houses and then just wear shoes at my own.
At your own house? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. You guys all agree with that? Okay. What'd you guys have?
We had basically the young adults were arguing whether men and women should decide what's decent and appropriate. We decided that both of them should decide, and that's because it affects both of them, and that way it's more equal.
So here's the situations in all these, okay? Again, I'm presuming you're church leaders. Timothy is being written to you. You are in the place of Timothy. You are a church leader. You're getting these instructions. And these kind of situations are situations that will come up sooner or later in ministry. Maybe not exactly, but somebody's going to have to make a call on it, right? And that's why I'm having you to sort of think through these things, because it's easy to pass it off and go, well, man, I just let somebody else to do it. It's even easy to say we're going to get men and women. We'll have men and women get together to do it, but try finding who wants to get together to do that. Most people go, I don't want to be part of that because I don't want to have to make those hard decisions that might offend people or something like that. Yeah, what do you guys have?
Okay, I'm just going to read it because it's a lot. You're asked to talk to a young woman who is obviously taking her dress cues from some of the more outrageous examples in our culture. This woman is new and you're not sure if she's yet a Christian, and you don't want to freak her out, embarrass her, or scare her away from growing in the faith by leaning into this area when she is such a newbie. What do you do? If you don't bring up the issue, what do you say to those who want you to get involved? So we said, we want to figure out if she's not a Christian, we want to know why she's there, we want to figure out her intentions. And you would probably have a girl approach her and ask her like where she gets her style from, just kind of get to know her and figure out what her intentions are, and if her intentions are to like, we didn't get really past that other than like figure out what her intentions are, get to know her, and then keep her coming to church. Unless it's like really outrageous.
Yeah.
Like, really outrageous, then you have to like
Right.
something like a swimsuit to church, that's
Right.
different. But like just like a mildly inappropriate outfit, I feel like you were just trying to get to know her, keep getting her to come, because eventually she's gonna we're gonna like talk to her about eventually getting her used to it, or she's gonna see how other people dress and change how she dresses.
Okay. So in 1967, there's a little thing called the Jesus movement happened. And it happened primarily with young people who were coming out of the hippie movement. I was in high school, but I was kind of wrapped up in a little bit of that thing, but not as extreme as some of the other ones. I went to Love-Ins and things like that. And we started getting girls. Now, churches in those days were affairs to suit up for. Men wore ties. Women dressed. They didn't dress down at all. They dressed up. And all of a sudden, there's these girls coming, and they weren't wearing skimpy stuff or like that. But in those days, bras were optional. Okay, and people were freaking out. The older crew was freaking out because these young women were coming in with obviously no bras on, and they were putting a ton of pressure. Don't let them come here if they're not going to put on a bra. Okay? How would you handle something like that? I'm asking everybody, not just you.
Personally, I would talk to people who have a problem with it, because I believe it's more important to have people in church getting to know God and then coming to their own conclusion of, oh, I need to wear a bra, rather than like someone. They can go to a church that doesn't have those people in it if it really bothers them.
Okay.
Because they're clearly not there for the right reasons.
Most pastors would rear back at that decision, but that is an option. By the way, Chuck Smith did that. If you ever heard the story, one of his elders told me that. He said when there's a movie out about that guy right now, but he started the Calvary Chapel movement, and they were getting all these guys coming, and they were coming in barefoot. They're coming in barefoot, dirty feet, and people were flipping out about it, right? And so they had an elders meeting, and this guy who told me he was one of the guys in the elders meeting. He goes, we were just saying, man, they're gonna wreck our carpet. All these kids with their barefoot, oily and dirty bare feet. And Chuck, pretty smart, he saw through the ploy. He goes, so the problem's the carpet. It's not having the long hair, patchouli smelling hippie guys comes. Oh no, that's fine, but it's their bare feet. We got to do something about that. And he
So
goes.
you like rip out the carpet.
So that night after his elders meeting, he went out and ripped up all the carpet out of the church. Problem solved. That guy that told me the story said, I was so mad I left the church. Later on, he saw what God was doing in that and saw his own stubbornness in trying to hang on to that, and he was fully converted the other direction. But as things happen, people start showing up, and what happens is evangelism is super messy, and you get this kind of situation in it all the time. Let's do a couple more while we still have some time. You guys.
Do you think there should be a different dress standard for Sunday morning than any other day? Why or why not? Do men and women who are on stage, do you think that men and women on stage should have a different dress standard than those in the audience? If so, what is the difference? Who should decide? And what would you do if you were leading worship and one of the players showed up dressed in a way you thought was not adequate for that role? It's a hard question because the first one, just different dress standard, because do people wear their PJs all day long? So if they come to church in their PJs, or do they wear t-shirts and jeans and they come to church in t-shirt and jeans, or what's this? We don't even know what their standard is. So.
But in church, do we sort of have a standard?
Yeah.
I mean, if a guy showed up just in his bathing suit, would he have violated the standard?
Yeah. Probably.
Probably, because he. But if he just was sitting there with his bathing suit, which, by the way, that one of the guys in my high school group that was a brand new believer showed up on Sunday morning in the straight church I was part of up in Galileo, only a bathing suit.
No, I think there's a difference between a standard if someone is coming for the first time,
Yeah.
coming for the second time. But like she said, if they want to be incorporated in the community, they're probably gonna want to fit in at some point.
And this guy he was just so dumb he didn't realize he'd never been to church before. So.
Yeah.
But-
On stage, should they have a different dress standard? At least at my church, the only thing we say is, it's modest and don't put words across your chest because that's advertising something other than.
Do most of you guys agree with that? If you're on stage, you ought to have a different standard than the people sitting in the thing? You don't think so? Okay.
I don't think it has to be a different standard in the sense of, but just respectful.
Okay. Yeah.
I think you should have I don't think you need to pretend that you're all high and mighty and that you're better than anyone else in the congregation, but I think because you are putting yourself and representing the church and who God is, I think you should dress a little bit more, be more of an example rather because you are a leader.
Okay.
And you're trying to lead these people, but don't be distracting. Find something that's not distracting, but it's like, okay, I put effort into this because I put effort into leading you in worship
And that's a key thing. Rather than be mindless about it, put effort into it. And you can really tell when people don't put much effort, they just grab whatever's close. I remember this one kid, obviously he just grabbed the first clean t-shirt out of the drawer. He was our drummer. And it had a giant pot leaf on it, right? Like that. From his old days, right? And he's playing in church, and I'm looking at him going, I think we're giving two messages here, Maybe that ought to go into the rag pile and not be what you wear on Sunday morning, And the worst one, probably shouldn't tell you this one because it was so crazy, but the church we were meeting at was in a shopping center up in Galileo, and all the light was coming through windows like this. So you had the stage light was all behind you, right, coming through. And this one gal got up to lead worship, and she had a white dress on. You know what that probably meant? All the guys are trying to lead worship like this because when that light came through the back, you could tell everything you could see the moles on her knees or whatever, you could see everything, and it was like, everybody was so embarrassed for her. She had no idea, and all the guys just going, and that was a mistake, right? It was a mistake, but you can guarantee that some of the wives went and talked to her afterwards and goes, maybe wear something dark that isn't translucent, you know, that kind of thing.
It also says who decides if that's appropriate. And I would think if it's a man, it depends on a worship leader, yes, but you want us to do same sex, so if the worship leader is the other sex, maybe his wife or somebody else respected in the church.
Right. And by the way, I get more complaints about what people wear on stage than I do about the sound. Just so you know. So be aware of that if you're going. I get people come to me and complain, and I just go, hey, you know, they'll figure it out. If it's really gnarly, we'll get on them, you know. But I get more complaints about that than anything else.
I personally don't agree with, you know, having to dress up to go on stage, because I feel like a big part of evangelism is lowering yourself to be on the same level as everybody else in the church.
Yeah, can you be on the same level though and not be distracting? That's a question. So you know, like if I wore a suit on Sunday morning, I would be distracting.
Exactly. Yeah, it can go both
Right, right. It'd be, you know, and my wife makes me wear long pants on Sunday. Have you noticed? I never get to wear shorts on Sunday morning because my wife goes, nope, you know, you need to wear long pants on Sunday morning because you're up on the stage and your knees are ugly. Okay, I'll take that, you know.
So we have one more question.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were leading worship and one of the players showed up dressed in a way that was not adequate for that role? Well, there's a big difference on like if it's you're see-through.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not standing up on stage that Sunday, and maybe you can come.
Let's
back.
just say her shorts are way up there.
Yeah. So maybe they don't need to serve that Sunday, or maybe they have a change.
Who's gonna make that decision?
The worship leader or somebody else, and like.
Again, these are real life situations I'm getting to. Okay. So who did I miss? You guys in the back?
I mean, if someone showed up with Black Lives Matter in their T-shirt, like.
Yeah, back table? No, yeah, back table. What'd you guys have on yours? Real quick, we're gonna wrap up.
It says your friend invited you to come to their small group, but all the women have their hair covered when the meeting starts, and then they read 1 Corinthians 11:4-6, where it talks about how a woman should have her head covered, where it's dishonorable, and if she has her head shaved and not covered, she might as well. It is a disgrace for women to have their hair cut. And what do you do? Do you follow the group and cover your head, or do you basically leave the group? And we came to the conclusion that you can either leave or you can submit, because it's not hurting you or your relationship with the Lord, and it's not going against what the Bible says. Do you really need to continue that in today's standards? No. And so if you stayed and submitted, maybe later on you can talk to the leaders with what's going on, and talk about why they're doing this, or you can decide to leave that group and find a different in-law group to attend.
The reason I'm tossing these out to you guys is these are real world situations that leaders have to do something about. And 1 Timothy's loaded, it's a whole can of worms in here that he unloads onto poor Timothy. Paul unloads onto Timothy. You got to do this, got to do that, but he doesn't tell him how to do it. And so we tend to have standards, but we don't know quite know what to do with those standards. We don't know how much is too much, you know? When have we gone overboard and we're too wealthy? Our clothes are too expensive, or we're flashing like we're really wealthy around other people. Is that good or bad? We're all about name brands and stuff. We're not that much problem here in Kauai on that kind of thing, but in some places in the mainland, you go to churches and it's like a pick and fashion show. You know, is that good or bad? And if it's not good, how do we navigate our ways through that if people are sensitive to that? Particularly if you have people from one side of the tracks trying to intermingle with people from the other side of the
I
tracks.
feel like you would feel a dynamic right away. Because some people just dress up, and they might be rich, and they might just dress up because they want to wear their best to church and honor God. But then there might be other places where that's the thing, where it's a talent show, or it's a one me up. So you would feel that pretty easily if you came into that, which way it was going.
Right, one would hope. One would hope. So, again, we're going to leave you with these problems. We're running out of time, but I'm going to leave you with these problems, and we're going to get to some more of the can of worms later on, because 1 Timothy is like loaded with this kind of stuff. And these are decisions that leaders wrestle with all the time on some level, okay? Whether it's the worship leader, whether it's the evangelistic guy who's just stoked that the biker's coming in, and the guy reeks of tobacco and and doesn't know the etiquette in church and all that kind of stuff, and they want to make him feel loved. And the little old lady who's freaking out on the down the road, who's going, what do you bring that kind of guy in? That kind of. You have all those kinds of interesting personalities that you have to learn how to navigate what to do, and then people coming up with these verses and quoting them to you and going, we ought to cover people's hair. That person's modest. See what your job. You're a leader. You've got to go talk to that girl or that guy or whatever. You're going to get that all the time. So you need to think through how you're going to approach those things, what you're going to say, how you're going to try to do a win-win, who you're willing to lose. If you're going to be like Chuck Smith and just go, oh, fine, I'll tear up the carpet so that these people can be here. If you got the guts to do that. But again, being a leader, as we're going to see as we move through 1 Timothy, it's not for chickens. It's not for chickens. And you got to be a person sometimes takes it on the chin for the hard decisions you have to make. But you also have to be really wise in how you make those decisions so that they're made, in a caring and a fair way and a biblical way to what's going on. Any other questions before we? Thank you for letting me throw these things at you. That's a word of prayer, okay? Father, just thank you for hard stuff in this book, confusing stuff, stuff that we don't even know what to do with. Give us wisdom how to sort through these things, through the culture, through the changes of style and fashion, through the emotions of people, the different attitudes and ideas and immaturity that comes in with a church body of people who are slowly being transformed. Give us wisdom on how to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.